Welcome back to another episode of Out of the Blank Podcast. He's back again, and this time the book is out. It's coming to the United States, so for all of us Americans, we get to learn a little bit about some trials, some war trials. You want to explain a little bit about it, Russell, and also introduce yourself to everyone out there listening?
Sure. Thanks for having me back, Robbie. Appreciate it. Yeah, my name's Russell Kent. I'm a previous JFK researcher, but I kind of got that out of my system, and I've moved on to.
Teach me how. Teach me how.
Yeah, well, write a book, Robbie. That's the way I did it anyway. So yeah, so British war crimes trials became interesting because there's a forensic science element to the British war crimes trials, which um, which I noticed when I was doing my research for JFK. And I moved on to the British war crimes trial to see where forensic science was used in those trials, only to find that it barely made the courtrooms. But that did get me interested in those trials. And I was absolutely astonished to find that nobody had ever written about them in one place before. So they kind of get mentioned at the end of books. So books about the Great Escape, Stalag Luft 3, they mention the war crimes trial at the end, but no details of the trial. And yet there were several, and quite a few people were tried. And that was the same for all of the British war crimes trials. There's no single book about them. This is the first time in English anybody has written about them. So I was quite astonished about that and managed to get a publisher. So that's a good thing.
We've talked about it in the past, but do you think it was because of boredom of people eventually kind of fading off as the trials kept proceeding and they were just trying to get it done as fast as possible? We've talked a lot about these in previous episodes. People listening, if you wanted to go back and see a more in-depth discussion, this is kind of just the book is out. We're going to kind of cover some things and talk about the process. But also a neglected part of history, like when it comes to like a lot of people don't care about other people's history, if that makes sense. You know, if it's not in the United States or didn't happen here, a lot of Americans are going to tend to look away from that. And that would be like with other countries. I think you're the one guy in the UK who cares about the JFK assassination. Mostly it's like an American thing because for them it's something different, like Jack the Ripper or something.
Yeah, that's not strictly true, Robbie. There's a whole group here called DP UK who were interested in the JFK assassination. They
I've
have
had a few of them on, but it seems like everybody I talk to from the UK, they're just like not interested in the JFK subject. I'm like, really, this is like the fascination for Americans.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, but then he was the leader of the free world, and so that there's you can skew it to an international interest as well. Um, and everybody should be interested in the crime of the century, really, wasn't it? So, um, but with the British war crimes trials, people did get kind of fatigue with it all, I think, after the war. They just wanted it all to be over and they wanted to forget about it and move on with their lives. Um, that was an aspect, but there was barely any reporting of it in the press. So there was the International War Crimes Trial, the International Military Tribunal at Nuremberg, and that did get a fair amount of press, particularly at the beginning of the trial and the end of the trial. But it went on for nearly a year, and people were just not interested in coverage of it. And eventually, newspapers stopped sending people to cover it. And certainly that was true of the other war crimes trials by the Allies. So there weren't just British trials, there were American trials, there were French trials, there were Russian trials, and they were barely covered by their press. You may not have heard of the US Dachau trials. There was many trials. In fact, I made a note of it this morning just in case it should come up, but there were 465 US trials. Well, there isn't a book on them. There's one book on the prosecutor of those trials. But this is a wide open field for anybody in the US who wants to write about those trials in the same way that I have. You've just got to get access to the National Archives, and you can be there for years covering these trials.
Why do you think there's such little talked about or written about? Like if I Google any of the things, like you can find some things on Zyklon B for sure. You can't find a lot of stuff about Ravensbrück besides I think like one documentary and then one dude did a YouTube video that was about 5 minutes long. There's very little information besides like going to a National Archives website and even then what's online that's available compared to what's not online. But you went to actual places, you visited libraries and you visited these places and you got the real documents and you sat down and researched it. Why do you think there's such little conversation or available information, like it's not a big interest. Do you think it's because of the fact that there's like mortality and there's a lot of pain and suffering that kind of went on that people tend to stay away from?
Well, that's a possibility for sure. But I think the main reason is people just don't know about it. People don't know that there was a concentration camp specifically built for women, Ravensbrück, where, I mean, tens of thousands of women went through it and tens of thousands of them died there. And people don't know about the camp outside Hamburg that I went to called Neuengamme. Again, 40,000 people died there. People just don't know about it. You know about the main camps because I think um, what's really captured people's attention is the Holocaust, which was, a killing of a whole group of people, millions of people, just for their religious beliefs, just for being Jewish. And that does capture your imagination. These other camps, people were killed just because they were undesirable in some way. In Neuengamme, they were often part of the resistance from the occupied countries. Or in Ravensbrück, sure, there was a lot of Jewish women there as well. But there was a lot of Polish women and Russian women and Hungarian women who were there just because their countries were occupied and they might have been part of a minor resistance at some point, or a major resistance in the case of the Polish people, the uprising in Warsaw. A lot of women found themselves in Ravensbrück after that. So I think that generally people just don't know about it. And I was one of them. I didn't know about it. I came across the British War Crimes Trials and was absolutely amazed at how many there were, 328. And I decided just to go to the site of the kind of concentration of the trials, which was in Hamburg. Out of the 328, 150 were tried in one building in Hamburg called the Curiohaus. And the Curiohaus is still standing. So I literally emailed them and said, could I come and see these former courtrooms? And they said, sure. And they were really kind and showed me round. And they were actually very young people. The guy that showed me round was in an office with a bunch of 20-year-olds. They were in their 20s. He had no idea. He had no idea it was a court previously. And I was telling him the history of the place. And then while I was there, of course, I went to Neuengamme, which is, and this is the case with most of the concentration camps within Germany. They're very well looked after. Most of them have a museum attached and an archive attached. And Neuengamme had a fantastic archive. I contacted the archivist, and this is true of every place I contacted in Germany. They just said, sure, come and see us. And they opened the archive to me and said, take as much time as you like. We'll answer as many questions as you like. We're extremely generous. And I think perhaps pleased to know that somebody outside the school projects that they have in Germany was interested. So that's why I went to Hamburg, and we can get into some other places I went to as well.
I want to ask, at any of these places that you went and visited, was there limited material based on what you could find online? Not like specifically just going to the archive, seeing the whole plethora of stuff and seeing what they had online, but like I've noticed with the Ravensbrück documentary, there was a lot of witnesses that were, or not witnesses, victims, I would say, that were there, that were also in the documentary, and they apparently enlightened people to a whole other side of things that were not written down or were not kept about, and that people didn't even know what was going on at Ravensbrück. So I was wondering if you were able to find any online material or any interviews with someone who might have been somewhere that might have been different from what you were reading based on the written stuff you found at the archives.
Yeah, most of the concentration camps have a website which you can go to and have a look, and they have various quality of material on them. The Neuengamme site is fantastic. It's all in English, and you can find out quite a lot of detail before you go there. Um, the archive there has a file on every prisoner that went through the camp, which is absolutely amazing and probably unique in concentration camp terms. Ravensbrück certainly doesn't have because the SS destroyed the documents before the camp was liberated, and it was liberated by the Russians, who were none too careful about maintaining and have not been too good about sharing information since their liberation. Um, you can you can find a few things online with Ravensbrück, but most of the material comes in the form of sort of survivor testimony, books by survivors. um, a good sort of round overview book, you like, is by Sarah Helms. It's called "If This Is a Woman," um, and she talks about a lot of the survivors, but also talks about the structure of the camp and how it was set up, and who set it up and when they did it. Actually, Ravensbrück is on my visit list. I'm hoping to go to Germany this fall, and I'll be visiting. It'll be a fun trip, won't it? Belsen, Ravensbrück, Sachsenhausen, and some of the minor camps that people wouldn't have heard of.
You'll probably need a few naps within there just to keep yourself from getting too depressed.
Yeah, yeah. I'll have to be careful, but I was okay when I went to Hamburg. Um, I did cry when I went to the Bullenhauser Dam, and we'll come to that later. Bullenhauser Dam is pretty um, uh, it's deep stuff there. There was death of children, which it gets to everybody really, and that's a section in the book that lots of people find quite challenging. I think it's chapter 4 is the killing of children, um, and perhaps people didn't even realize that children were deliberately targeted in that way.
When we're talking about Neuengamme or we're talking about just the trials being done in the Curio House, what was the first thing that caught your eye or that you thought was a bit disturbing? I understand they had to do a lot of these people all at once. They had to kind of rush it through because they had a limited resources, limited time. They were doing all of this. But a lot of us, like when it comes to court trials, at least over here in the States, we prefer the individuality of the person being read, the crimes, and just one at a time. But again, I look at these photographs, and I'll show a couple here soon, but you're seeing a whole group of people all lined up with just numbers on them. And it kind of takes not the severity out of it, but the individual focus on what we should be listing off and who should be being tried instead of just putting them all in a bucket and saying this is what you're all being tried for. Again, it takes the kind of emphasis out of it. And I'm pretty sure one of the disturbing things is that not a lot of these people really got any penalty. I think they were jailed or sentenced to prison or something, but it was like being off with good behavior, or they were let out like almost close to like immediately after they were sentenced.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And I haven't really got to the bottom of how trials were selected to be heard. We had over 52,000 people in custody and probably 10,000 cases that were being developed at one stage. And the British realized we couldn't possibly get through that many trials. The first trial that was heard was the Belsen trial, the main Belsen trial. Took 2 months to try 45 people. Well, if you're going to try and put 52,000 people through the court, we'd still be having those trials now. It would have taken decades. I haven't got to the bottom of how each trial, each case was decided to go to trial, if you like. Um, I know that there was fatigue that set in, political fatigue and public fatigue as well, because we were moving into the Cold War phase. There was a political feeling that we should wrap these trials up pretty quickly. And so you'll find some major criminals just never saw the inside of courtroom. We did the major sort of concentration camps that we'd either liberated, by we I mean the British had liberated, or we held the majority of the suspects in custody. That's why we did the Ravensbrück trials, and there were several. I think there was 7 or 9 Ravensbrück trials. That was in the Russian occupied zone, so normally they would have done the trial, but we had the people in custody. We did the Belsen trials, we did the Neuengamme trials, and after that, really, the British investigators went after people who had killed British soldiers. So that's why you find the Stalag Luft 3 or the Great Escape trials occupied an enormous amount of investigation and court time and press as well. Um, and less important to the investigators at the time were crimes against other allies. So, of course, the masses of crimes against Polish people and Russian people for who the victims, sorry, not the victims, the suspects we had in custody for those trials, but we weren't. We were going to prioritize British trials above them, and lowest of all were crimes against German people. They they were lowest priority of all, And so we just never got through all those trials. You were talking about the actual sentences people got, and I have done some analysis on this, and I found that I've got the actual numbers here, so I can give you the numbers, and these will be available in my next book, which is probably going to be called Belsen and Beyond. But we prosecuted 937 people, and we either acquitted or we freed by the 1950s 80% of those people, which is, what an enormous waste of time. Those The people we sent to prison for life were walking the streets within 10 years of when we sentenced them.
Did you find just from a reactionary? You're shocked. I'm shocked too. I wanted to ask this about the way that they did the trials, specifically the speeding process and the kind of getting through it. For anybody that's the first time viewer of it or hearing that, it's disgusting, and you're kind of like, I can't believe that anybody would agree to do that. Any politician, anybody would even be involved in some type of idea. These people need their time in court, and you need to make sure that justice is served. But do you find that you have a different perspective from examining it from more of a political fatigue and kind of resource draining viewpoint that I would feel like if you were diving in with research and the way you kind of explained it a minute ago about how it was took 2 months to do this many people, then they had 2,000. That brings, I guess, a little bit more of a understanding of why they had to do it the way they did it, which kind of leaves us to kind of ask the questions like, was there a better option? I mean, so far that was the option, and I can't think of a better one right now.
No, I don't think there was a better one. I think the only thing you could have done maybe is had a hierarchy of atrocity. I'm not sure whether that's something anybody would want to get involved in. Um, the other problem was that the sheer numbers of people, not just that we had in custody, but the people who were involved in these things. Um, I mean, I was astonished to find out how many camps and ghettos there were in occupied Europe and Germany. Have you any idea, Robbie? The US the US Holocaust Museum, Memorial Museum, estimates there were 42,500 concentration camps and ghettos.
42,500.
I mean, can you believe it?
Well, I'm surprised why you only learn about like five of them, maybe, if you learn about five of them.
I know. It's They weren't all the size of Auschwitz.
Yeah.
Obviously, they were small ones where only 200 people were held, or maybe 500 people. But there were a hell of a lot of them. Now, if you think about how many people were guarding those camps, so take a camp of 500 people, of which there were probably 20,000 of those. You'd need at least 10 guards on 3 shifts to guard those many people. That's 30 people, nearly all of whom treated those people badly and didn't stand up for them in any way. So you've got 30 for 15,000 camps. The numbers just become enormous. That's 45,000 people. No, it's not. It's 450,000 people. 500,000 people we're getting towards, aren't we?
Was there ever a moment for you where you were able to sense out an objective more than just like the extermination of a race? Did you ever see any military purpose? Or I know with some camps there were not necessarily as worse as others, they're still bad, but there was like for some camps it was like these people come in here, they're gone. We have to keep because we're getting so many high fluctuation of numbers. There's no way that we can keep them all. So like they have to do routinely just getting exterminating people. But in other camps with lesser populations, I wonder if you could see a different objective. Like, is this really just a hate towards a race? Is this really this whole thing, or is this like an order that was like hold these people here? You can't do anything with them. Was there some other moral that you could sense out of it? Again, I guess the main theme is what everyone knows it to be. I was just wondering if you happen to pick up notes of something else.
But it's certainly various types of camps, if you like. So we know about extermination camps, so of which Auschwitz-Birkenau was the main one in terms of number of people killed. But there was Treblinka and Helno and Belzec, which were destroyed before we were able to liberate anybody. They were for destroying Jewish people, more or less Jewish people, and some other minor groups, minor in the sense of numbers, like travelers, gypsies, homosexuals, um, and other groups that we know the Nazis wanted to destroy, who they saw as under people, untermenschen. Um, and then there were camps that were labor camps. So the idea of these was that the people weren't destroyed, they weren't gassed, they were worked to death. That was the aim of the camp, was because they knew the supply of people was endless. They didn't need to look after them or feed them well, or even take care that they didn't overwork them. They did quite the opposite. They overworked them and underfed them, and people died by the tens of thousands. Um, those camps were specifically for that, and the people in those camps were mostly people from the occupied countries, mainly Russia and Poland. So those people were worked to death in slave labor camps. And Neuengamme was one of those, really. It was a brickmaking camp. So people were worked to death there. And many minor camps, such as dock works and all kinds of heavy, dirty industry that they tried to put these people to work in. And
Before we,
then there were,
well, I was going to ask before we
there,
get to the actual trial part, could I ask about the work education camps? I think a lot
I'm
of people,
glad you asked me about those.
yeah, a lot of people don't know that that was a thing or anything, so I'm kind of interested myself.
Yeah, work education camps, never been written about in English before. I think it's a type of camp that most people have never heard of. In German, and I wrote this down because I knew I would never remember how to say it. Let me just look it up. It's, I got it right. It's Arbeitserziehungslager, and for short, they called it AEL. So nobody had ever heard of these camps. They were specifically Gestapo camps where you could be sent essentially for not working hard enough for the Nazi regime. So anybody, German people mainly, if they were not working hard enough at work in the ammunitions factory or any kind of work, they could be sent there by the Gestapo to be taught a lesson. These were essentially, the British called them punishment camps. These were essentially, you haven't worked hard enough for us, we'll show you what work is. And they were put to work the most heavy and dirty work that the Nazis could find. So typically in quarries and sand pits and gravel pits, all kinds of mines, horrible work that most people wouldn't want to do. They were put to work, fed very badly, and treated very badly during the day. So after they got back from work, they were made to run around the camp and do squats and all kinds of terrible things to exhaust them. They were usually sentenced for only 8 weeks in one of those camps. So a lot of people went through. They went through and came out. But if the Gestapo wanted to, they could keep you in for indefinitely. In fact, I found there was a mark on some of the files that this person was marked as an indefinite prisoner in one of these terrible places. Hundreds, thousands of people died in them, of course, because they were so badly treated. Um, and of course, the other thing that they did was, if you were released, the Gestapo could release you into what they called protective custody. Protective custody meant that you went to a concentration camp afterwards.
So you're just getting transferred to another one?
You're transferred to a concentration camp, not an AEL.
Okay.
So, it was out of the frying pan into the fire, really, wasn't it?
I was say that none of them sound good, like you're getting a cold beverage or anything. So
Oh, they were horrible places, and the idea was to put the fear of God into you, so that when you went out of one of these camps, you would tell everybody you worked with and all of your friends, for goodness sake, make your best efforts on behalf of this government, because if you don't, you'll end up in one of these places, and you don't want to go there.
do you believe that was a good moral, or not moral strategy, but that was a good way of keeping people in line, just the fear aspect of these concentration camps, the rumors that began to spread, and the horrors that were being done, being told, crossed lands, basically to the point where some people had to get involved from other countries, but just things that kind of raised suspicions and kind of had people fall in line with an aspect of don't disobey from the soldiers.
It certainly made people fall in line, I'm sure. And there was a lot of people, and there are people around today who would say that's where we need to put some of our people who don't do their best for the country, or criminal elements maybe. Um, and it certainly made people fall in line. But what it showed to me was that the average German person couldn't possibly not have known about these kind of camps. And if they knew about AELs, the work education camps, they almost certainly knew about concentration camps because they knew you could go there afterwards. And with 42,500 of them, who could not know about them? You know, it's
You talked about the main aggressors getting more punishment for the main aggressors. Do you, when you look at a camp, a specific name that will be involved in a camp, one first one that comes to your head, but does that camp embody what that person who ran it, their mind was, or what they maybe like the guy with Zyklon B I was mentioning to you off air. I can show a photo of it, the just the one you sent me of the three people sitting there, just so people can see something of what I'm talking about. Um, but this photo right here, again, I don't know their superiority. They look like they might be a little bit important, but the whole Zyklon B affair, and if you look at what was said when what I read to you on the trial of Bruno Tesch, maybe you can even explain who he is. But it says right here, I kept no black book in which I recorded the misdeeds of my employees. Neither did I keep a sealed envelope about Dr. Droshin. Now, reading that, when you see I kept no black book in which I recorded the misdeeds of my employees, which means that eventually the cruelty was kind of up to I don't care about it. Do whatever, make it horrible. So again, whatever was going on or whatever was an issue that they wanted to keep their hands away from or keep themselves out of whatever business and let these people just go rampant or just have no kind of I guess recourse for their actions. Again, if you're running the whole thing and you're trying to stay like I'm not involved, it was my company or it was whatever, you can say that all you want, but I'm curious. The camp usually would it's like a warden at a prison. It all kind of forms around this one person's idea or this one person's kind of orders. So I'm curious if you were able to tell any of that through any of the camps that you looked at, and who would you consider like someone that would be like a good example of like a leader that obviously had probably like one of the sickest minds.
yeah. This Cyclone B trial um, of these people you can see here that the man on the left is the managing director of the company called Tesch and Stabenau, and for short they were called Tester. He was the managing director, and he was one of the inventors of Cyclone B, which was an insecticide that was used to um, fumigate clothes that had lots of lice in them, or kill rats and mice in the holds of ships. Next to him was his deputy, who's Karl Weinbacher, and the last chap on the right he's a gas technician. Actually, he was a zoologist. His name's Dr. Joachim Drosin. So these three people were arrested by the British and put on trial for the supply of Zyklon B to a series of concentration camps, including Auschwitz. Now, in all of those camps, the clothing was put into put into rooms for disinfectant and delousing, and they used Zyklon B there. But the British managed to show that the amount of Zyklon B that was being supplied to these camps was way and above what they would need to do that, to delouse the clothing. Um, the question was, did Bruno Tesch and these other men, did they know that the Zyklon B was actually used to kill people in those camps? And that's what we needed to prove in the trial. So it was a strange trial, if you like, because it it hinged on whether the panel of judges believed that Bruno Tesch knew that the Zyklon B was being used for that purpose. And the main person who gave evidence, a guy called, what was his name? Okay, well, you can look in the book who it was, but a chap who'd been an accountant for the company before said he'd seen a note in which Bruno Tesch had written that words to the effect that he knew it was being used to kill people. And when the British asked him to produce that piece of paper, he couldn't. And they asked him why he couldn't. He said he burnt it. So this was a piece of evidence that didn't really exist. So the British then had to go. They interrogated various secretaries in the company to try and find out if they'd seen this piece of paper or had written similar memos, which revealed that Bruno Tesch knew that human beings were being killed, and it's not very it's not very good evidence. You'll see in the book. My opinion is that they were very young secretaries who were brought into an interrogation room by big burly British soldiers and more or less coerced into giving the evidence that they wanted. I'm not sure that a British court now and a British court in the UK rather than in Germany would have convicted on that evidence. Nevertheless, Bruno Tesch and his deputy were both hanged for the crime. Um,
So some justice actually was served.
well, if you believe that they knew,
How, I don't understand how you could ship so much to a spot for fumigating of rats or lice or whatever you're trying to do without it not knowing that there's a horrible thing that's going on in some of these camps. I get it. People didn't want to know, and it's kind of like a moral dilemma you got to deal with yourself. That do you think that these people just are they as guilty just because they wanted to not know and look away? Again, in my opinion, when it's something of this drastic measure and you're making these chemicals and you know the usages it could be done for, I would have to think it'd have to cross your mind at a point. And again, that comes into a more moral argument. I wouldn't want to be on the gaveling decision of that. Um, but I don't know. Some of these reactions I see in some of the Nuremberg just days that went on, there's not a lot of like sorry expressions on faces. There's just a lot of people that are just there like, what? Just get it over with. What are you doing? Like, where are we going? What's going on? And then, like, they just want their sentencing or whatever they're going to get. And a lot of them don't even feel like they're really in the wrong, which is weird too.
yeah. I mean, I agree with you. I think they knew, but was it proven that they were knew? They knew. That's that's the test in court, isn't it? You've got to prove beyond reasonable doubt. Um,
I think for this, you fudge the numbers on the rules, bro. I'm sorry. You said forensic evidence in the beginning, right? I'm curious to what forensics they used, but did they not have to rely on mostly eyewitness testimony or just witness accounts? Because how else do you understand if they never took camera footage and did any of this type of stuff? You're going by receipt papers that are easily going to be trashed. Oh, that's all they did back then when they're trying to get rid of things is burn it all, don't leave any evidence behind. So at this point, you kind of have to rely on eyewitness testimony and what people went through, survivor stories.
well, I actually found in the archive the the Auschwitz list of what they received into the camp, what how much of this Zyklon B they received, and that this was very telling. Let me also say that Bruno Tesch was an SS. He was a member of the SS. But back to the camp records, I found that in 1 year, Tester supplied 12 tons of Zyklon B. Now, it doesn't mean much until you realize how much is needed to kill a person. So you only need 1 gram. This is a tiny amount. I know Americans don't deal in grams, but it's a very small amount. Look it up. Um, and 1 gram would kill a person. So 1,000 grams would kill 1,000 people. 1 kilogram would kill 1 million people. So a ton is 100 kilograms.
Yeah, I don't see them not knowing what was going on with their things. I don't think they worried about that much of a lice infestation.
Yeah. Well, that's 100,000 people with a ton or so, isn't it? So,
Do you believe the person that developed the drug should also get the like the guy all the way on the right, the zoologist guy? Do you think that
yeah.
he should also get the same thing for the person that decided to create it and mass produce it at such a level and also ship it?
Well, he didn't. He didn't get the death penalty.
Yeah.
Uh, can't remember if he was acquitted or not. I think he might have been acquitted because the whole point was you knew you were supplying gas to kill people, and they proved that they proved to the court that Bruno Tesch did know, and they said that his deputy couldn't possibly have not known because he knew everything that Tesch knew. But that the gas technician, the chap who was responsible for finding out how much of the gas killed so many lice or so many rats, he probably didn't know. So he was acquitted, I believe. Um, but I mean, 12 tons of the gas supplied to Auschwitz in 1943 was sufficient to kill 12 million people. So we know that how many people died in Auschwitz. It was nearly 2 million. So there was enough supply this material to kill them and fumigate all their clothes and the clothes for millions of people in Poland as well.
In a humanistic standpoint, not a law perspective, but do you feel like enough evidence really matters if you have like a witness or if you have someone that was survived through one of these camps that these people were involved in? Because at that point, I would say that's enough for me. I wouldn't need any data or material shipping cargo lists or anything.
No, but the problem with eyewitness testimony is that it usually came from people who'd passed through the camps, so they had a reason to make their testimony the blackest they could. That's not a very good way of putting it. The law requires a witness to be as disinterested as possible, so as independent of the event as possible. And of course, if you're in a concentration camp, you're not independent of the events. Now, I'm not saying that those people didn't go through what they went through or didn't give accurate or true testimony. I think most of them did, but it would have been possible to embellish your testimony.
Or just leave out certain details.
Um, I think, and this certainly happened with some of the British trials. If they had a doctor who a was locked in the camps with everybody else and had only tried to help the inmates, then their testimony was looked upon as more reliable than somebody who was perhaps a flower seller who'd been incarcerated.
I got you.
Because, and also you have to put yourself in those times. So in those times, we were not as politically correct as we are now. So there was a social hierarchy, for instance. So your doctors and your lawyers and your accountants were right at the top of that hierarchy. Maybe they still are in some places, you know. And at the bottom of that hierarchy was your men who emptied the bins and swept the streets, you know. But their experience of the crimes was just as much as horrible as those at the top of the tree.
Well, how also do you trust a scientist whose their research of what they're looking to explore is getting funded by someone who's using it for maybe ulterior motives? Again, they might not be in agreement with using the Zyklon B to gas people or do any of that, but now they're getting more research funding and they're getting primary focus on what they've been trying to work out and turn into something. So again, they're more than likely not going to speak up until it comes punishment day. But again, that's
Yeah.
that's a little too late.
Yeah. And the other thing I found out was that um, we in Britain we still had the ability to sentence somebody to corporal punishment, which is infliction of pain in essence. So we still had the ability to sentence someone to a number of lashes with a wooden stick, for instance. I'm not sure whether that actually happened in the 40s. It almost certainly happened in the 50s. And my father's generation will tell you that if you were caught doing something wrong by a policeman at the time, he would happily give you a slap round the ear and send you home, whereupon your parents would give you another slap round the ear for doing something wrong. They trusted the policeman. So, you know, a slap round the ear and hitting someone with a stick wasn't seen as being as wrong as we see it now. And that happened all the time in the concentration camps, of course. People were slapped and hit and kicked and punched and struck with sticks and bars and all kinds of stuff. But at the time, it wasn't seen quite as bad as we see it now.
Do you believe their punishments would have been worse if this was something that was getting tried today in the eyes of history?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I say, no, well, yes, I think more people would have gone to prison for longer and they probably would have been kept in prison for a longer time. But of course, we don't have the death penalty in this country anymore.
I mentioned this earlier, but I wanted to show this photo because I just wanted people to see. I don't like for me, this isn't a trial. This looks like I'm looking at a jury right now of just people sitting on the thing that look like I can't individually look at and hear the crimes and analyze the type of reaction I should be having based on what was said. If you told me all these people slaughtered a bunch of people, I'm like, well, who did the most? Like, who are we talking? I need an individual account. If we're lumping all these people together, a lot of the focus and a lot of the anger tends to be taken out of it. Again, there are some people that were doing things as a job, does not make it responsible or does not make it right for them following along with it. But there are other individuals that were getting a sick thrill from this. A lot of people that were in charge with orders, and that's the problem, is that we did classify some, like individuals definitely got different penalties based on how what their involvement was, but to me it wasn't enough. Again, you got 2,000 people. I understand the pressure. I don't want to be in charge of being responsible for making that order of how you do the trial, but I don't know. To me, this was just like it. Just I can't. There's not the connection you need from the human aspect that we all kind of rely on in good moral decisions and really judgments.
But what you're seeing in this picture is the Curiohaus Court number one, and the people in the back with the numbers around their neck were the suspects or the people who'd been accused. And usually, number one, which is the guy on the most left of this picture, would be the commandant of the camp. So this number of people weren't very often in the dock. It was usually concentration camps. So all these people would have been SS concentration camp guards. The people sitting immediately in front of them wearing gowns were their defence counsellors, British defence counsellors mostly. Later on, they were German defence counsel as well. And they were facing the judges who were sitting the opposite side of the court.
I wonder how it feels to be on the defense side of that.
Yeah, that's a good question, because there was a big argument in the British press in one of the trials where the Belsen trial, where people were defended by British solicitors, and a solicitor is someone who doesn't usually defend someone in court but knows about the law. Um, and the British people were saying, we don't want what are our solicitors doing defending these people? There should be a presumption of guilt. They were in a concentration camp. They were guarding it. Surely they're guilty until proven innocent. But eventually, we kind of ran out of the number of solicitors who were either available or willing to do the job. And we started to allow German barristers, people who were used to presenting in court, to defend people. They were at a bit of a disadvantage because they didn't understand English law and they didn't understand the adversarial trial that we have, which is similar to yours. We have defense counsel, we have prosecution counselors, and they present the case to the judges. That's very different to other European courts. I think there's a bit of a discussion of that in the book.
I wanted to get to this one because we never talked about it in any of our just past discussions. Maybe you can describe a little bit about what this is and what exactly went on here, so we can
Yeah,
I can get a little bit of background information on it too.
yes, of course. This is my picture of a former school called the Bullenhuser Dam in Hamburg. And during the war, it was a sub camp of the Neuengamme concentration camp. And the people housed here were used to clear rubble after bombing of Hamburg and unexploded bombs and ordnance, and basically clear up the streets, if you like. But at the end of 1945, when the British were approaching Hamburg in April, this place was evacuated and it was empty. And there was just a couple of SS caretakers who were left behind, very lowly SS people that were left behind just to look after the place. Um, but in Neuengamme, they had been doing some medical experimentation on children. Um, and this is highly detailed in the book, but I'll cut it as short as I can. They were being experimented on for TB, and the doctor who was doing the experiments wanted to find out if um, they could be saved from TB. And it was a ridiculous science. They couldn't possibly be in the way that he was hoping to do it. And as the British approached Neuengamme and Hamburg, they realized that they've got these 20 children who they'd been experimenting on. And this was going to look bad for them. No shit.
Yeah.
So you would think that they might have thought, well, we'll just let the children go, or we'll just put them in a hospital while we disappear. This wasn't really the Nazi way. They were ordered to kill the children, and essentially what they did is they brought them to this sub camp and they hanged them in the basement. And it's quite the most horrendous crime that I came across, really. And as I said, it's the only place that brought me to tears. It's it's a really awful place.
How did they
The
handle the
open
trial
door,
of how did they handle the trial of this when you're talking about killing children and just exterminating them in the basement?
yeah, yeah, it was, and it must have been very difficult for the British to bring them to trial, but they did. They brought as many people as they could that were responsible for this to trial. There was an SS doctor that was brought to trial, and I think there were four guards brought to trial. No, it might be more than that. It might be seven guards that were brought to trial. They were all given death sentences for it. There was a few people that escaped death sentence that got out before the British arrested them, and they came to various ends, if you like. So one of them was shot by other concentration camp inmates. Another chap was put into prison in Denmark for being in the SS. Um, the main doctor who was responsible for the trials in sorry for the experiments in the camp, he escaped to East Germany, but he was eventually arrested by the Stasi. He died in 1967 in a Stasi prison, and the fourth person responsible, a senior SS officer, he got away with it entirely. He died in 1994, I think. So I went into this. I'm not the only person to have had a look at this particular crime. There was a German journalist who found out about it, was horrified, and he did most of the groundwork for this, found out the names of the children, where they'd come from, and as a huge amount of detail. Um, but there, not a lot of detail about the trials. So I went to the National Archives, I found the trial transcripts and came up with a lot more information about the specific trials. But there is a fantastic museum here. It's a strange thing. It's only open on a Sunday afternoon, I think. The small door that you can see in the picture leads to the museum. It's a wonderful museum, really well done. Lots of information, also in English. Um, Brilliant people who run the museum. I was there on a Tuesday and the door was open. So I just stuck my head around. I knew it wasn't open and said, I'm British researcher. I'm here for the day and I really would like to see some information, whatever you've got. And they just invited me in. I got to see the entire museum on my own and all the rooms and the basement where the children were killed completely on my own. So it just goes to show how open they are to research these days. But a terrible place, which I know you'd never heard of it. I don't think anybody's ever heard of it in this country or in the US.
Do you know a specifically like besides the other guy you mentioned, but do you know why? Like, is there museums or are these people on not online? Do they have to go to like a website and they just don't publicize that they talk about these specific events? Because again, searching this up, it's very limited resources, and I feel like this would be a fascination for a lot of people that have some interest in history. In particular around this time period. And again, all we ever hear about, I mean, we've all read the Diary of Anne Frank, I think, in school, but again, the basic education on the whole Holocaust movement has been a taboo kind of subject. I don't know if it's because of the mass tragedy, but just anything to do with the kind of the Germans and the stuff. You only hear about really the war, Hitler, and then there's a couple movies based on like maybe one camp or something like that. But the number, again, that's a shocking number to even process in your mind. This one, I mean, it has its own Wikipedia page and there's a couple stuff on it, but for a lot of these, there's very limited available information, which again, credit to you as a researcher for going out there and, getting it and looking through archives and writing some of this stuff down and making books about it just for more education for the general public and myself as well too for, speaking about it on my show. But again, the whole process of getting information and then putting it into a book, how do you choose what to include? How do you choose what to not include? Like, I mean, put in another book or not want to talk about? Then also, how do you tackle this with a publicist? How do you go
Yeah,
about, releasing something again that might not get a lot of attention in the States? Hopefully it does. I hope it does. Um,
thank you.
but again, it's just a public interest matter. Everybody's obsessed with like Epstein, not really wanting to talk about like certain historical stuff again. But I feel like if people heard these stories, you'd be like, why isn't this a movie? Because it's just so shocking and awful. And I'm sure there's so many countless stories like this.
Yeah, and I think it could make a very good documentary series, probably. I'm hoping that somebody in television picks it up and picks up the book and sees the potential there. Um, there is an awful lot. I mean, 150 trials. What happened? The way I did it was I said, okay, what's interesting to me is that out of these 328 trials, 150 were done in this one location. So that already narrows it down for me. But of course, you can't write a book about 150 trials because it would be huge. It would be lots of volumes, and it would be pretty repetitive as well because, a crime like mistreating a slave laborer, there might have been 20 trials, 20 different trials for mistreating slave laborers. Well, 20 trials would be very similar, and it would quickly get repetitive and tedious. So then what I decided to do was, why don't I categorize these trials into some areas that make sense to me? So um, trials against captured for mistreating or killing captured British soldiers, trials for killing or mistreating slave laborers, trials against children, trials for these work education camps that we talked about, and end phase trials that I know you want to come on about to talk about. So those were the main areas. And then what I thought I'd do is, I mean, I investigated a lot of trials. Man, I was like 6 weeks in the archives looking at many, many trials, and not quite 150, but certainly 60 trials. So then I had to say, well, let me just illustrate those areas, those chapters by one or two, maybe three trials. So I think it ended up at being three trials. And so that put a constraint on it. So I tried to find the most interesting trials or the ones where I had the most data, because sometimes there's only one file in the National Archives covering a trial. So for some very minor trial, there'll just be a very small few pages about the procedure, and the procedure means who was in the court, who made up the court, who was the prosecutor, who was the defense, and very little trial transcript. But something like Stalag Luft 3, The Great Escape, had 400 files. So, that's obviously going to be of interest. So that was one that I included in the book. Um, and then you have a constraint from a publisher. No one's going to publish a book by a first time author that's over 80,000 words, say. It's roughly about 250, 300 pages. Um, the only people who get to publish larger books than that are professional historians who have written many other books. Someone like Max Hastings or Anthony Beaver, they would easily be able to publish a much larger book. The first time author, you've got no chance. So the idea is to make it appealing, make it interesting, make it not too long, and then go out and try and find an agent. Man, agents. So most publishers will not entertain a manuscript from an unknown author, even though I'd published a couple of books before, but not on this subject. They won't entertain an unknown author sending them a manuscript. It has to come via an agent. And the agent kind of represents you and says to the publisher, this guy's got a good idea. Why don't you think about it? And they'll send it to a dozen agents, a dozen publishers with whom they've got some kind of personal contact. That's the role of the agent, to represent you, get the best deal. So I sent the book to a lot of agents, 100 agents or something. None of them saw the potential or were interested in representing me, even though I said I thought this was a series of books. And that might be astounding to you, but I found the same with the JFK. I sent it to 150 agents. I had one agent that was interested in New York, and he sent it to a number of publishers, all of whom turned him down, and he released me from my contract. So what's the other way you can do it is, well, you could try and find a publisher who is in your niche. So we're very lucky in the UK and the US. There's a couple of publishers who only publish military history. So they were obviously the right publisher. And I approached the publisher Pen and Sword, who have offices in this country and the US. And almost the same day, they came back to me and said yes, they'd like to publish it, which just blew me away. I was so pleased. Um, and you don't really think about what royalty there's going to be or what process there's going to be. You're just very pleased that somebody actually wants to publish your book.
Well, I think with the extent of research that you've done and the places that you've traveled, it gives you more credence to the words that you probably have written down in your book. I mean, you're very thorough as a researcher from the JFK stuff I know. So I would just only give you more credit on that one. But have you ever tried reaching out to some type of counterculture magazine, like something like the Ramparts magazine that writes about political controversy, and even if they just publish an article about it? I mean, it's again something just to get the word out there as well too. Like I said, I know your work; it's good work. So the parts I have read of the book and the stuff you've been able to explain to me on the show have always been fascinating.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I've never done that. I've never written for a magazine. A lot of writers do go that way to get it's called a platform where you build your bona fides. So the more articles you get published, the more books you've published, the larger your platform for then publishing another book or another article. And so a lot of writers do go that way. That and there's not really a really good reason why I've not done that, except that I'm I get deeply into the research and the writing of the book. And to write an article would mean stepping away from writing a book and writing in a new way. So presenting something in, say, um, 500 or 600 words, maybe 1,000 words for a magazine. It's a different kind of writing, and yet it would be the same information. So I'd be presenting the same stuff twice, if you like.
Yeah, I want
I
to.
mean, certainly an option.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, I don't know. It's never. I guess it never hurts, depending on where you can get it publicized. Like I said, you just got it in the U.S. Why did the U.S. take so long?
Oh yeah, I'm not quite sure. The publisher didn't tell me. I mean, there's quite a few things with this publisher that's kind of strange, if you like. I submitted the book to them in April last year, 2024, and it wasn't published in the UK until April this year. So it took them a year. Although we had some editing cycles, essentially they sat on it for a year. We could have done it much more quickly than that. Could have done it in a month probably. Um, but they kind of know when to publish a book. So they probably have two periods that they really want to hit. They want to hit the summer market, so they publish in April, um, because lots of people go on holiday here, and maybe that's the kind of book they would like to take with them. And they want to hit the Christmas market, so November, so that you want to buy a book for your dad or your grandfather or your uncle, your brother. That's the kind of book that maybe they would like to buy, military history. So they have a particular time when they want to hit it. I'm not quite sure why it should be 2 or 3 months later in the States. And it was beginning of July, so that's what, 3 months, isn't it? Um, it could be literally printing it. So it could have been printed. I don't know where it was printed. I don't have my copy in front of me, whether it was printed in the UK or the copies in the US might be printed in the US. So there might have been a lead time for that. It could be they wanted to see what the sales were like in Europe before they hit the US, and to see how much they should publicize it. And I'll tell you how much they publicize it, about this much. It's they do hardly anything. They put a couple of if you've got a Facebook page for Pen and Sword, you'll get a release note. Um, but that's essentially all they do. They've not contacted, as far as I can tell, they've not contacted the press. But in some ways, I don't blame them, because I contacted every major newspaper in this country and all my local newspapers and every historical society I could think of, every magazine I could think of that might be interested in this country and in Germany. And I've only got one newspaper that wanted to do an article. It's really surprising because I emailed them on the anniversary of Belsen being liberated, which was 15th of April, 1945. It was the 80th anniversary this year. And I thought, this is perfect. I'll hit them all on that day and say, if you're interested in this, you're going to be interested in the trials. Nah, they weren't.
You'll see them post an article about it when it's the anniversary, but that's it. You'll never see a book or anything that they pick up. They just want to seem like they care to a lot of people. And sadly, that's I think we learned that from the JFK stuff. How many people come out on an anniversary event and just act like they've cared their whole life about it. I wanted to get to one last thing that we were going to talk about the trial for the end phase, killing during the end phase. Now, is this when everything is ceasing and it looks like it's all going to be over with, the war's ending, but people decided just to get rid of the people that they had just because they just wanted to do it?
Yeah, you got it. I mean, everything was going to shit at the end of the war for the Nazis. Um, Essentially, spring 1945, it was all going horribly wrong. They were being overrun by the Allies, the Americans, and the British from the West, and obviously other forces, Canadians, Australians, but um, and the French and the Free Polish, and from the East by the Russians. So very often the Gestapo and the SS took it upon themselves to get rid of all these people that they thought were undesirable, and just mass executions of these people. They saw it as their last chance, if you like. And you have to imagine at this time that there was a lot of talk about the Western allies joining forces with the Germans against the Russians. So if we had done that, of course, the Germans saw this as a good opportunity to get rid of a bunch of people they wanted rid of anyway, and would probably be their last opportunity to do so. And so there were, a horrendous series of mass executions at that time. And I think I cover three different cities in the book: Duisburg and Hanover and another place where there were specific killings. But it wasn't just the SS and the Gestapo that took it upon themselves. Essentially, the Nazi government told the populace that, if they saw any slave laborer who'd escaped from a camp, or someone was obviously a Jewish camp escapee or a POW, feel free to shoot them. And they did. They absolutely did. Shot as many as they could. It was absolutely disgraceful, the the license that these people gave themselves to shoot people in particularly March and April of 1945. So I've covered some of those trials in the book, because I think there are plenty of books on end phase and 1945, April 1945, downfall and Berlin, those kind of books. Very few cover the mass executions of these people, and none cover the trials afterwards, of course. So I thought it was important. And end phase is it's kind of, we don't hear it in English very much. It's a German phrase um, that they use to describe the last part of the war.
What did you learn from the way that they processed the trial? Do you think it was just? Did anybody else serve time or get killed or get the death penalty, or was it just all full on, just kind of glossing over it?
And not many people got the death penalty through those because
I feel like everybody should if you're a part of the end phase, or if you're just going to kill after it's all look like it's going to be over with.
it's absolutely amazing. There was one guy who was in the police. He was responsible for executing 11 people in a woods and shooting two unarmed Russian prisoners. And he essentially admitted to doing it in his trials. Um, Completely got away with it all. Um, one trial he was acquitted. The other trial he got very few years in prison and was released early anyway. And in the files in the National Archives, there's an inference that he went back into the German police afterwards. I have looked for his name in all the German police forces, in all the records I could find that are available publicly of German police forces. I couldn't find him, but it wouldn't surprise me if he did at all. Lots of these people just went back to their same jobs.
You can probably find them by looking up Satan spelled backwards. It's an anagram.
Yeah, there must be a way of doing it, but you probably need to be a German person who, in the police, who could get better access to their records than I can.
Again, and even how do you find records that someone has in their home? Who's going to be a family member that wants to step forward and say that this was someone that they're related to?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, and some records in the National Archives, I was reading records that were only released that last year, declassified. So a lot of stuff's classified. There's also records in the archives where you have to be invigilated. This is something I hadn't previously come across. So some archive records, when you order them, you have to go into a locked room where you're watched by a member of staff while you read the files, and then you have to put the files back and have to be allowed out of the room, unlocked to let out again. Which is amazing, isn't it? So those are kind of files that you really want to look at, invigilated.
Yeah, I want to give you a minute here, and I want to show the picture of your book, and I want you to be able to talk about it, its release, and everything like that, and what it means to you, and then get you to promote your links, and we'll wrap up. Russell, I always appreciate the time you give me to talk about these types of things, and the JFK ones that we've done as well too.
Robbie, thanks for having me on. Yeah, this is the Curiohaus Trials. It's my first book on British war crimes trials. My second book, Belson and Beyond, is currently in preparation for sending to the publisher, and there'll be a third book as well. So there'll be at least 3 volumes of this, and I'm trying to make these trials accessible and interesting and revelatory as well. The Curiohaus Trials being the first one, um, has some pretty good photographs in it as well. There are a lot more photographs. If you buy the book, um, and if you would kindly leave me a review on Amazon.com, that would be fantastic. I'd really appreciate that. You can get it at most bookstores. If they don't carry it, you can order it. Certainly available on all the usual online outlets in the States. Amazon.com are carrying it at the moment. Um, if you do that and you want to drop Robbie or me an email, Robbie will pass it on to me, I'm sure. I have an unpublished chapter from this book, which I'll happily send to you with, it's full of lots more photographs that I couldn't afford to put into the book. The author has to pay for photographs that go into the book. Who knew that previously? So, there's a good few in there, but there's more to come. And what's really important to me, though, is reviews, because I have to sell this book. I have to get good sales on this book, so that the publisher will publish my next book. Um, so if you would buy the Curiohaus Trials, I'd be eternally grateful. If you send an email, then I'll get in touch with you and send you some more stuff.
And I'll make sure I link all your links in the description below, Russell. Again, thank you so much for giving me the time to be able to talk about this. And I appreciate the work and research you have done on a subject that isn't covered as much as other subjects. And it should honestly be talked about in the same vein and talked about more. So, Russell, good on you for doing that and putting in the effort that you've done. And we look forward to the next books that are coming out as well, too. I'll have you back on here to discuss. Thank you so much, everybody, for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank. Stay tuned for our next episode.